Cassius Clay is a slave name, and I didn't choose it and I didn't want it. I am Muhammad Ali. I'm a free man. It means beloved of God, and I assist people use it when they speak it to me and of me. I am the astronaut of boxing. Even if you dream of beating me, you better wake up and apologize. Joe Lewis and Dempsey were just pilots. I'm in the world of my own. I'm so fast to the light, I turned off the light switch in my hotel room and I was in bed before the room was dark. He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. I couldn't agree more. I know where I'm going and I know the truth, and I don't have to be what you want me to be. I'm free to be what I want. Oh man, those are my favorite quotes. Well, this is probably one of the most emotional video that I have to do. And we all know that we all have one life to live, and we have to cherish it the best way we can. And Muhammad Ali, I must say, lived one of the, you can say one of the most unique human beings that's ever walked this God green earth. Going back to the days where, he was coming from up in Kentucky, had to endure some bit of hardships while growing up there, only having high school education, which is, his highest level of education, for his life. Began his journey at the age of 18. Had some would say a pretty good amateur career. He had his first few fights. He was going up against the likes of Archie Moore. He beat Archie Moore in his 16th pro fight, a young guy who was going in, putting into the fray as early as he did. And then after that, he went up against the likes of Henry Cooper, which some would argue is one of the best British fighters that's ever walked in the UK. Then he went up against Sonny Liston, a guy that everybody was afraid of, who was feared by many heavyweights, who was the officially undisputed champion. And no one gave Ali a shot in the world of winning that fight. But at that time, he was a 7-1 underdog. But during that time, that was a massive underdog, being a massive underdog, kind of like parallel to, let's say, Tyson and Holyfield, the first fight. But here's a man who went through Liston, upset him, beat him in a rematch, and some would argue that was the Phantom Punch rematch. Some felt that Liston took a dive in that fight, but it is what it is. Then he went up against the Hall of Famers of Floyd Patterson, who Sonny Liston walked through like it was nothing, like he was butter, twice. George Chuvalo, Hall of Famer. Again, he fought Henry Cooper in the rematch, and went back to his backyard to beat him. Then he fought Brian London in his backyard as well. Then he fought Carlo Mildenberger in Germany. Then he came back to the USA and fought Hall of Famers Cleveland Williams and Ernie Terrell. And then he, after the Ernie Terrell fight, he fought Zori Foley. Then fought Hall of Famer Joey Corey. Then another Hall of Famer, Oscar Benavidez, which we all know was a very good fighter at this time. Then his first loss was against Joe Frazier. Okay, unanimous decision that he lost in the 15-round fight, and him and Frazier had probably one of the best trilogies, one of the top two trilogies of all time, and I would rank Holyfield and Bowe along with that. He beat, obviously he lost to Joe Frazier, then he beat Jimmy Ellis, a former world champion who's a Hall of Famer, Buster Mathis Sr., then beat Javallo in the rematch and beat Corey in the rematch, beat Patterson in the rematch where many felt that Patterson was way over the hill when he fought him at that time. Beat Bob Foster, who was one of the greatest light heavyweights of all time. Beat him, Hall of Famer. Lost to Ken Norton in the first fight. Beat him in the rematch. Some would dispute that Norton won that fight. So, Hall of Famer, world champion Ken Norton. Then he beat Rudy Lubez. And then he got a rematch with Joe Frazier. And the second fight, which turned out to be a great fight, he won that rematch unanimous decision. So then he went to take on George Foreman, who walked through Joe Frazier and Kid Norton. And Foreman was a unbelievable fighter at his stature. Even though he was wild with his punches, but he had incredible power, and a lot of heavyweights were frightened of this man. Probably more frightened than they were of Sonny Liston. And Ali wasn't given a chance of the world to win that fight. And some of his handlers wanted to call off that fight because they didn't have no confidence of Ali beating him. So Ali went to fight Foreman in the famous Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire and KO'd him in the eighth round, and is the only man in history to KO George Foreman. Went on to have on another defenses or whatnot, and beat Joe Frazier in the third fight in the Thrilla in Manila, which was one of the most greatest fights of all time in the 14th round TKO. Then went on to fight the likes of Jimmy Young, pretty decent heavyweight. Some would argue that Jimmy Young won that fight. I have to agree. I thought Jimmy Young won it, but it is what it is. Traveled to Germany to face Richard Dunn. Then come back to the States to fight Ken Norton in the third fight trilogy, which some would dispute Norton won that fight, but I thought Ali edged it. And then he fought a hard punching, one of the most devastating punching heavyweights of all time, Ernie Schaefer's. Made him look pretty easy. And then lost to Leon Spinks, and some would argue that that's Ali's most humiliating loss his career, other than Larry Holmes fight. But we'll get to that in a second. But when Ali lost that fight, that was when he was entering his I don't want to mention it, but he was having some bit of health issues. But he came back and avenged that loss against Leon Spinks, whatnot, and of course the Larry Holmes loss and the Trevor Berbick's loss, which wrapped up his career in Drama in Bahamas, as they dubbed it. But anyhow, Ali is one of the few men who had captured the unified heavyweight title more than on two occasions or more. And I think he's the only heavyweight in history to become the undisputed champion on two or more occasions. So, and looking on his resume, he'd beaten 12 Hall of Famers, and he only fought in one division. And despite his illustrious career, this man has fought on many social issues that, many minorities have strived for a very long time. Even after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed in by then President Lyndon Johnson, some issues were still outstanding. There were still, still some issues on economic equality. There were some issues on education equality, whatnot. And Ali has stood on that, particularly on the Vietnam War, where a lot of African Americans were being drafted first in line. And Ali at one point was being drafted, and he said no. He refused to go to Vietnam because he has reservations towards this. And this is what he said, quote, he said, quote, his belief was that, his religious belief when he was, he converted to Islam, is that war is not the answer, is war is not what they believe in. It goes against the Holy Quran. He said here, this is the actual quote. I was paraphrasing there for a second. He said their war is against the teachings of the Holy Quran. I am not trying to dodge the draft. We're not supposed to take part of no wars unless declared by Allah or the messenger. We don't take part in Christian wars or wars of any unbelievers. More scrutiny, and famously he said, I ain't got no quarrel with the Viet Cong. No Viet Cong ever called me a nigga. Now, Ali was pretty much he was a rebel when it came to the United States government. And at that time, it was rightfully so. And, of course, the Vietnam situation didn't progress, which cost the Democrats the presidency in the House for a long period of time because of the way they were handling things under Johnson. And it got so bad to the point that, a lot more lives were being lost in Vietnam. And Dr. Martin Luther King was very reluctant to speak on this issue because he didn't want to alienate Lyndon Johnson and his administration for supporting the Civil Rights Act agenda, obviously, which Johnson helped sign into law. And Johnson one time had when he signed that into law, he even told his former press secretary at the time, Bill Moyers, that, we have given it to the Democrats the South. At the time, to win the presidency or even win the House or the Senate, you had to get the South to vote on your issues because they were the biggest electorate at the time. But, as time progressed, the South is no longer the biggest electorate. So, man, how times change. But when King was reluctant to speak in the fear of alienating Johnson and in his administration, as I mentioned, Ali is actually the one who actually persuaded him to voice his opposition at the against the war, and King eventually did that. So obviously, his stance on the Vietnam and his stance on other government, other social and economic issues, kind of caused him to be monitored by the NSA, which is kind of not too surprising because I think this was part of the illegal wiretappings that Nixon and his administration had had conducted. I think this was also with the help of J. Edgar Hoover as well. I could be wrong on that because I know he was infamous for wiretapping a lot of people illegally, and he had dirt on a lot of foreign leaders. So along, Nixon had also had that information as well. So this was part of the Church Commission, where a lot of people have gotten, prosecuted for their crimes, whatnot. But anyways, I'm getting off a little topic here. This is more about Ali, what he stands for. But needless to say, my point is that this man was so remarkable in many ways, not only inside the ring, but outside the ring. He was revered and respected by all walks of life. All, people of color, black, white, brown, Asian, yellow, purple, blue, you name it. Even though I didn't really tolerate the disrespect he was getting by certain fighters a couple years back, but that's totally irrelevant at this point. But the only point that I'm trying to make is that you didn't have to like him, you didn't have to love him, but at least respect what the man had to go through and what he has accomplished in his very, very courageous and difficult life. Believe it or not, he did have a difficult life. And he said to himself that if he had to ever go back and do it again, he would do it, and he would not apologize for what he's done. So all I gotta say is, champ, I gotta say is rest in peace. We will miss you. Your body may be gone, but your soul will always live on, and your legacy will always live on. No matter what the naysayers have always said about you and what the naysayers say about you now before your passing, there's one thing they can never take away from you. Two things, I should say. And both of those things were your legacy and your spirit. So with that in closing, rest in peace. And may God rest his soul.